So if you keep your goals, does that make you a goalkeeper? Welcome to The Big Puzzle. In this podcast, we explore the subtle connections between science, religion, politics, economics, and history. One piece at a time, we unveil the big picture of this shared experience that we call life. The name of this podcast is The Big Puzzle. And the reason why I chose that is because I found out that everything is actually connected with everything else. And there's a lot of learning that can be done by looking at those connections. Like I say, sometimes those connections are subtle, but many times are kind of obvious. We just never look at them. So as an example, I want to connect today soccer with Donald Trump. So how can we connect them both? So soccer or football, or the kind of football that you actually use your foot for, it's very popular around the world, and people get very passionate about that. One thing that always draws my attention is that when you go to a stadium during a game, you can easily predict how the crowd will behave in certain circumstances. Let's say that a kicker kicks to the goal and misses barely, right? So you know at that point that the crowd will go, ooh. You don't know what each individual in that crowd will be doing. Some of them will be grabbing their heads, some of them will looking at the sky, some of them will looking down. But you know that the crowd will emit that sound. 100% sure. There's no doubt about that. And the reason why that happens is because as the number increases, our behavior changes. And we're going to be exploring that today. So, somebody who takes this idea to the extreme is Isaac Asimov. When he was writing his trilogy Foundation, actually 7 books, but initially was a trilogy, he created this character that was Hari Seldon. And Hari Seldon was both a historian and a psychology and a mathematician. I can't remember exactly what his background was, but he realized that if he analyzed the humanity as a whole, the future of humanity was easily predictable, right? So he did that. He just predicted what humanity would be doing in the next centuries. And so the whole book is about that and the predictions and how he created a society that would be in charge of monitoring and all of that. It's a really cool series of books, so if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. But this idea of, he called that psychohistory, and it seems to be a little far-fetched, but there has been some attempts in the real world, in scientific or academia, to actually do something like that. And that discipline is called cliodynamics. So cliodynamics is based on the idea that there are certain patterns that repeat over and over in history. So you can learn what is going to happen just by looking in history if similar patterns were observed. And then you can extrapolate from that. Right? Well, I think it's a very cool idea. I don't think it's explored enough, mostly because people who go into history are mostly not very interested in statistics or mathematics or system dynamics. So that's why I think there's a gap there that is very interesting to feel. But one example I could put is socialism. We talk about socialism. And socialism always follows the same pattern. I won't go through that one here because I did it already many times. But yeah, I think it's a clear case in which you can see that the same pattern repeats, so you can predict. And in the case of socialism, the prediction is always the same. In the long run, it fails. And it fails miserably, and it hurts a lot of people, right? So, also this idea, I don't know if they did it on purpose, but I think that Hollywood caught this idea. And maybe I'm reading too much into this, but the movie Forrest Gump, you know, we think about Forrest as being kind of this dumb guy, but really I think what he represents is the whole American society. Right? If you rewatch that movie, you will recognize that basically Forrest Gump was a representation or a symbol of the whole society. So how society got obsessed with some things, you know, and really when you look back and you look at the whole society, some of the decisions seem really dumb. And that's why Forrest Gump actually represents this. Talking about crowds, I also noticed something related to this. So I wrote humor, I did stand-up comedy, and something that I noticed is that the reaction of the people to jokes or you know, humor in general, it really depends on the size of the crowd. So if you tell the funniest joke or you tell the funniest story to one person, most likely if you're successful you will get a chuckle, a short chuckle. But if there's 5 people in the room, you're probably going to get some laugh. And if there's 500 people, you get, you know, a huge laughter. Why is that? Well, we would say that you know, laughter is contagious. So hearing somebody laugh makes you laugh even more. There's kind of this feedback loop that you get, you know, more and more of what you're producing. And people might be laughing for hours, even for dumb jokes, just because of this effect. So if you're planning to do something related to humor, I would suggest you look for big crowds. Those are way easier. This is also related to the concept of peer pressure. When we think about peer pressure, we usually think about negative peer pressure, but there's such a thing as positive peer pressure. So peer pressure is basically how your behavior is affected because of other people, your peers, not because of authority. That's why it's called peer pressure, but because of your peers. You have, and we've discussed this in the past. We all want to be accepted, and you know, especially by our peers. So that's why peer pressure works. But again, the bigger the number of peers, the more will affect you. Right? This could even happen without any real peer pressure. We talk about the Abilene paradox, how a group of people make a decision assuming that everybody else wants a certain outcome when the truth is that none of them really want that outcome. So that's the Abilene paradox. It's a way in which peer pressure happens. Sorry, but this part is a little uphill. But peer pressure happens unintentionally. So you're both part of the one being pressed, and you're also exerting pressure in your peers. If we take this to the extreme, this is also what happens when we call mob mentality, right? Or also called hive mind, or there's different definitions. In mob mentality, what happens, so the way it manifests is that you will be doing things that you wouldn't do individually. So when you are in the crowd, you do things just following the crowd. You lose your individuality, you lose your agency. And if you think about it, you turn into a feeling being more than a thinking being. Right? It's really about feelings, emotions. And emotions are way more easy to manipulate than thought. Right? Reason is very difficult to manipulate. It can be done, and we might talk about that some other time, but in general, emotions are way easier to manipulate. So, again, it's easier to manipulate a crowd just because the crowd has more exposed their feelings, and their emotions, and their thoughts. That's how mob mentality works. And you might think about January 6th and what happened that day, and you might agree with Trump, disagree, you might think that he promoted it or not. Is it a conscious manipulation, or was just kind of the Abilene paradox in which Trump manipulated people without wanting to do it? Right? It's just people were so predisposed to do dumb stuff. But everybody pretty much agrees that the result was very dumb. That didn't bring any benefits to anybody, absolutely anybody. And actually hurt Trump way more than could have benefited him. As a side note, I live in a country that has several military coups. That's not January 6th. That's not how it works. It's not a bunch of rednecks that go into a building. So people who are saying, oh, they want to overthrow democracy, no, that's not how it works. But that's for another discussion. So going back to January 6th, then this idea of having a crowd reacting emotionally to things and doing dumb stuff. So far what we can see is that the size of the crowd makes the outcomes more predictable and makes the decisions dumber. And if you think about it, dumber and unpredictable are connected. So why is somebody dumb? Well, because you can predict. They don't reason. They don't have any high-level thoughts. So they are dumb. They haven't thought about what they're doing. What about democracy then? Democracy is the rule of the people. Well, wouldn't that make people do bad decisions, make bad decisions based on what we're talking? And yes, it does. That is the problem with democracy. If we're talking about direct democracy, in which all the decisions are made by everybody, it's basically, like a huge committee. There's this saying that say, if you want something not to be accomplished, just create a committee. Well, democracy is the biggest committee possible for a country, right? And yeah, the decisions would be really dumb, would be contradictory, would be easily manipulated. And this is connected to this idea also of the statistic that is called regression to the mean, or regression towards the mean. And what that says is that outliers usually don't stay outliers. If you are top of the list in a test, for instance, because you got the highest grade, well, that is a very bad predictor about your performance in the next test, because most likely you're going to be performing worse. Right? So this idea is also connected, it's also related to the idea of crowds and mob mentality and democracy. So this idea that you end up averaging, you end up doing something that doesn't have anything interesting. And that leads to, okay, if democracy is not the way to go, what should we do? Well, I think that they figured that out, and it's called representative democracy. So basically what you do in a representative democracy is people just express their opinion about who should be making the decisions. But the decisions are not made directly by the people, but by the representative. There's a problem there, right? So again, it's a crowd. They most likely are not going to pick the best person because they're dumb. They're working as a mob, and they're dumb. But on the other hand, it's better to have one person making decisions. It's somebody that will be accountable, somebody who would think about the issues, that will not be just following the crowd. That's why I have high respect for politicians who, well, I don't think I have high respect for any politician, but let's say that I have my highest respect possible is for politicians who don't follow the polls, who they just do what they believe is the best thing to do. Right? And those are very hard to find. So, in conclusion, be careful when you are in a crowd. Always think about, would I be doing this if I would be alone? And if you honestly say, yeah, I would, then be my guest. But sometimes you will realize that you're doing things just because you got into that hive mind or that mob mentality. And if that happens, get away. Find a place where you can be alone, you can calm down, you can rein those feelings and emotions with your thoughts. So that will be my homework for you today. If you liked this idea of how to connect things, how we went from soccer to Trump and back, please like this video. Also, you can share it with other people. My idea for this podcast is not to go in depth, and I will explain why in a different video, but it's a way to look at those connections. The power is in the connection, not necessarily in that concept. If you find a new connection between concepts, that's where the money is. And finally, subscribe. I'll try to post this as often as I can. But yeah, if you want to learn when the new video comes, please subscribe. So with that, I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.